Hello again, and welcome back to the layout. In this video, I will be taking you on a complete tour of my layout. As I mentioned in my channel introduction video, my layout is in a small space, so a layout tour would be over pretty quickly. So in addition to the tour, I will do a deep dive into the scenes, construction, and the decisions I made along the way. Now, let's get started. So when you come downstairs, this scene is what you see when you first walk into the layout room. As I mentioned in my channel introduction video, this is my signature scene. When I was brainstorming how I wanted to build my layout, I knew I wanted this style of lighting valance. In my opinion, it looks professional and gives the layout sort of a museum presentation. This dividing wall is 15 degrees off of the main wall. My thought for this was to extend the track a little more to the other side of the room, and I figured the track at an angle would add more visual interest. Also, the track coming off of the curve would transition into straight running more gracefully. The layout is 2 feet wide, and matching that width, I used 2x2s screwed into the dividing wall to attach the hardboard lighting valance. The outside will eventually be painted a soft, flat black color, but the inside is painted white, and this is to maximize the reflection of the light. These LED tube lights are from Gorjira and provide very nice bright light for the layout. They are 5000K, which was the closest I could find to daylight temperature, which is 5600K. I bought them in 4-foot and 2-foot tubes. The 4-foot tubes running the length of this straight portion, and the 2-foot tubes lighting the curved end of the lighting valance. I used wax paper and loose leaf paper to diffuse some of the light on the left side of this 2-foot tube. This end of the tube was closer to the backdrop compared to the rest of the lights, making that portion of the backdrop a lot brighter. It's a basic solution, but it works well to even out the light. The backdrop is hardboard as well. I used 2 coats of flat interior latex paint in a shade of sky blue. On this end of the scene, the backdrop curves out of the layout. I didn't want the backdrop to meet at a sharp angle because in my opinion, it's a bit jarring to look at. Using this method and good lighting, you basically don't notice the bend of the backdrop, unless you're looking at its outline. Now I've gotten the construction aspect of this scene out of the way, we can now move on to the scene itself. As mentioned in my channel introduction video, this signature scene is supposed to represent Logan Hill. Logan Hill is located on BNSF's Orin subdivision in the Powder River Basin. Since I model mainly Union Pacific, UP has trackage rights on the Orin sub, making this scene prototypical in that regard. This route is essentially all coal, but on my layout, any type of train can be seen running up and down Logan Hill. This 20+ mile stretch on the Orin sub is a quadruple mainline. Having no way to fit that on my layout, I settled for just a double track mainline. Additionally, Logan Hill is on a 1% grade, but I kept this scene flat. Having a grade for this scene wouldn't have worked with the rest of the layout. This portion of the scene represents the top of Logan Hill. This bridge is a very popular rail fanning spot in real life. On my layout, it's scratch built and acts as a disguise as trains come in and out of the backdrop. I decided to scratch build it because there wasn't anything I could buy that would properly fit the space. Plus, I wanted to try scratch building for the first time. I taped wax paper to the ends of the structure so this celluclay wouldn't stick to it. I didn't like the idea of structures being permanently stuck or attached to the layout. Plus, this way I could easily lift out the bridge to paint it down the line or repair it. Honestly, I'm glad I did it this way because this bridge support broke away from the main structure. The radius of both tracks as they come out of the backdrop are 48 inches and 45.5 inches respectively. I figured a 2.5 inch spacing between tracks is plenty and still looks pretty prototypical. In addition, the track is super elevated, as is every mainline turn on the layout. A 48 inch radius is pretty large in HO scale, but adding super elevated curves really elevates a layout to another level, in my opinion. I tried to get the landscaping as close as I could to the real life location. Each side of the track is flanked by a maintenance road that leads up to the bridge. This portion of the landscape was carved out of foam using primarily a knife, a surf-form shaver, and a handsaw. The shaver was the biggest workhorse by far because I used it for pretty much all of the landform shaping. Then I used Sayu clay to create the embankment next to the track. Since I had a tight space to work in, the embankment slopes are a lot steeper than in real life, but I think it still gives a good impression of the location. Working with Sayu clay has its pros and cons, but ultimately, I do like using it, which is why I plan on doing a video about it in the future. As we move down further on the layout, the middle of this scene is supposed to represent the north side of Logan Hill. Since the bridge is on the crest of the hill, looking north is technically downhill. At this location on the prototype, loaded coal trains head south up the hill, and empty buckets head north downhill. Just like the prototype, each side of the tracks maintains the service roads from the bridge. I've left space on either side, so when it comes time to put down scenery, I'll be able to incorporate the roads on either side. Using this footage to base my landscaping from, looking down the north side of the hill, the landscape is flowy with rolling hills and gradually becomes smaller. I've had to compress probably over a mile of this landscape to fit my scene. To get this desired look of the landscape, I cut rectangular pieces of foam and stacked them in sort of a stair-step fashion. I find that using latex caulk works best for gluing pieces together. After about a day or so to let the caulk dry, I went to town carving away until I had this desired look. Now looking to the roadbed and track. Most Class 1 main lines, and especially on this subdivision, the track sits pretty high on the ballast off the ground. I figured the height of normal cork roadbed wouldn't be high enough, so my first layer of cork was 1/8 inch sheets from the craft store. I cut them into 3-foot long strips in the same width as normal cork roadbed, glued them down, then glued the normal cork roadbed on top. I weathered the track using an airbrush. I know I could have bought flat spray paint, but I wanted to practice using an airbrush. I figured spraying track would be pretty forgiving. I then bit the bullet and painted each individual tie on both tracks. It was extremely tedious, but I figured it would be a good level of detail, especially for a scene that isn't too big. The prototype, however, uses concrete ties. I would have liked to do the same, but at the time I was buying track, I just bought whatever I could find at a halfway decent price. Moving near the end is this dip in the landscape. Towards this end of the scene, I started to use more creative license. The bottom of Logan Hill basically spits trains out right at Converse Junction, which leads into one of the mines. In my mind, there was no way to represent this on this end of the scene. I ended up taking inspiration from this clip. Not only does it look vast and awesome, it appears that the railroad filled in the land to keep the track level, leaving some of these embankments. I used this aspect as motivation to create this small scene. On my layout, the hill kept going down as the railroad filled in the land for the right-of-way. Even though this scene took more creative liberties, it's still in the spirit of what you see along the Orin subdivision. Moving to the far end of the scene, where the track goes behind the backdrop, it's supposed to represent Edwards Road. In real life, this road is many miles beyond the previous locations. It's just hyper-compressed on my layout. I figured it would be the best solution to hide track into the backdrop. Just like the bridge on the other end, this structure is scratch-built too. For the same reason, there wasn't anything store-bought I could find that would fit this scene. Just like the other bridge, this one does come out, but it's more modular. Building like this makes it a lot easier to remove for painting down the road or for whatever other reason. Basically, it's just a more flexible way of doing things. Unlike the other side of the bridge where the foam is secure, carved, and gaps filled with Sayu clay, this is just taped down. I'm still undecided how I want to attach it permanently, or if at all. I like the ability to take it off so I can get cool shots closer to track level down the straightaway. The real trick here for me is to figure out how to make it look seamless while I can still have it lift out. The last talking point about this end of the scene, the track here starts its bend at a 48-inch degree radius, basically finishing the turn at the other end of the scene. Once the track is past the backdrop, it tightens up to a 22-inch radius to make the turn to the rest of the layout. These turns are super elevated as well. Now that I've thoroughly covered my signature scene, let's head to the middle of the layout. Alright everybody, so here is the inner portion of my layout. So the way I'm going to do this portion of the video is more of a free-flowing style. No edited voiceover, just kind of me talking right into the mic, live into the camera. And I'm shooting this with my iPhone because it has a lot better stabilization than my regular camera, and just this kind of flyby footage, I figured my iPhone is a lot better suited for that. So I'm gonna do kind of a quick, brief flyby of the layout, and then go into a little bit more detail with my phone, and then once I cut to some close-ups, that is back to my regular camera. So this layout is built on open grid benchwork, kind of secured and nailed to this almost interior framing looking benchwork. I did it this way because I needed it to be sturdy, because the layout is freestanding, it's not attached to the walls or anything. And I chose to do 2x3s because I figured it would be plenty sturdy. And believe me, it's sturdy. Maybe 2x3s were overkill, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. And then the track sits on 1/2-inch plywood. I chose 1/2 inch over 3/4 inch because it was cheaper, a little bit lighter, and I figured easier to work with. And even if it does sag in some areas, it's not too noticeable. If anything, it just looks like natural undulation of the tracks. And yeah, it's not a huge issue for me that the track is not on 3/4 inch plywood. Additionally, my layout is 48 inches off the ground with an additional 3 inches on risers. I chose 3-inch risers because it really helped to level out the track, considering my basement floor is by no means level. The wiring for the layout is pretty simple and standard bus wiring with drops coming from the track. I chose to keep it pretty simple because I didn't want to overcomplicate the layout with wiring for like signals or switch machines or anything like that. So right here, you kind of saw that the bus kind of splits into 2 main buses. The far bus wire goes to the front of the layout, and then this near bus wire kind of right there is really for this industrial scene here. I'll go more into detail about that here in a moment, but I chose to do it this way because I didn't want super long drop wires. And the wiring eventually meets back up all the way over here at this kind of block right here. Then yeah, the wiring continues. Meets back up and splits here, kind of where I started. Then in this next part of the video, I'm going to kind of talk about the mainline scenes, and then I'll circle back and talk about the kind of industrial area that goes off over there. So where these tank cars and coal hoppers are out of the backdrop, there is actually the top of Logan Hill. You guys saw the other side in the earlier part of the video. So coming out of the backdrop on this side, the train will continue along the 48-inch radius curve. In this whole scene, along this curve and then in the corner is going to represent Kirkwood, Missouri. I'm native to St. Louis, and if anyone else is and knows of Kirkwood, they kind of know how great of a rail fanning area it is, and honestly how great of a town Kirkwood is. But yeah, my goal is to have the Kirkwood station incorporated kind of somewhere along here, and then have Lindbergh or South Kirkwood Road come across the tracks here. And of course I need to take a lot of creative license because this kind of short line or spur doesn't really exist on location, but on my layout I'll kind of fib it a little bit and then it'll turn into a road that just kind of leads into the industrial area. And then as the track continues this way, this whole area, hopefully I'm gonna have it represent Lockwood Avenue kind of as it enters Webster Groves. Again, Webster Groves is an incredible area. I love rail fanning and just hanging out there. So it'll continue kind of the Webster Groves vibe along this straight portion, skip a chunk of miles, and then roughly here is kind of where I plan, maybe not, to have the track go over Big Bend Road. I know there's kind of like a cool bridge and the road dips under, and it's kind of like still the infrastructure from like the 60s or whenever the kind of road and area was built. And then as we continue along this way, in this corner, I don't really know what I want there, but then as the track continues along this 36-inch radius curve, inside I believe is like, what, 33 and a half, 2.5 inch spacing between tracks. But anyway, so along this kind of, along the wall portion of the track is gonna loosely represent, if you're on Grand Avenue and you cross the bridge and you see all the trackage, you have like the kind of UP yard area, the BNSF interchange. This area obviously doesn't look like it at all, but that was a bit of my inspiration to kind of make this area of the layout more busy as far as track goes. And then this crossover is the only one on my layout. I wanted to do a double crossover and kind of have it farther back here, but you know, reaching over this far over the layout just felt like ergonomically wouldn't have been a great idea. So I just kind of made the compromise and kept just this simple crossover. And then of course back here is where the trains go in and out of the other side of the backdrop, kind of Edwards Road, as I mentioned earlier, is right on the other side of the backdrop. Of course, on this side, there's gonna be the backdrop, you know, from left to right here, curving and then straightening out along this wall. And I do plan on having, of course, another bridge and some buildings in this corner to disguise the track. And this track right here that kind of goes into nothing, by design, I kind of wanted it to be a piece of track that theoretically goes into like another area, but since it's hidden by the backdrop and the bridge, it just gives the illusion the layout is bigger, like there's kind of, you know, another scene that doesn't exist, but just the illusion of something else on the other side. So the industrial area comes off the main line here onto this little short line track. So this turnout here was scratch built. A little later on, I'll go more into detail on that and kind of my thoughts on building it. Curved turnout was definitely hard to do, but it was necessary for this space. Anyway, so the track kind of comes off the main line, loses elevation as it would normally. Main lines are, you know, usually higher than short lines as far as the ballast level goes. So it will continue this turn, and by design on this side I kind of wanted it to be less busy, classic, you know, short line kind of branching off into not nowhere, but maybe just a less populated area. This industry where these hoppers are, I don't know the industry I want there, but I know it'll service covered hoppers. This track right here kind of serves multiple purposes. It can be a runaround, a staging, a holding track. Some tough decisions had to be made along the way, and as far as how I wanted the layout to work operationally, and then I really just chose the path of what is the most fun rather than the rabbit hole of prototypical. And eventually choices just need to be made on the layout, so it was just my executive decision to make this area how it is. Back to these turnouts. These had to be kind of heavily modified to fit the caboose industry ground throws. I will go a bit more into detail in these later in some close-ups. As the track continues this way, this industry over here is gonna primarily service box cars, maybe flat cars, even though I don't have any there right now. But pretty much once the backdrop is in, along this whole wall here is gonna be primarily just warehouse flats. I plan on scratch building a few, maybe adding some store-bought ones, kit bashing. I'll kind of just, discover what I want to do once I get to that point. And then right here, this little spur will service, or the industry will be, tank car related. I'm not entirely sure what I want it to look like, but that's just the general idea. So this industrial area can service, or not service, but I'll be able to switch multiple kinds of cars, box cars, tank cars, and covered hoppers. And this whole area really was motivated by the industrial switching area in Maryland Heights. This track doesn't really represent any particular part of it. It's just kind of motivation to add a switching area to the layout. And then as the track comes back around, we come this way and where these 2x hoppers are sitting. So this little spur here is an afterthought. I just put it here because I wanted a little bit more trackage to kind of have the illusion of this area being more busy. I don't really know its purpose, maybe just some maintenance of way, to store an engine, or just like this, just some cars. And the turnout for that is actually the smallest one on the layout. I still need to put a Caboose Industry ground throw in, but that's a number 4. And I chose a number 4 because this is such a small siding. I didn't think it needed anything bigger, because all the turnouts for this industrial area are number 6s, and then all the turnouts for the main line are number 8s. And then the track will eventually come back onto the main line, gain some elevation back to the level the main line is at, and then connect on this turnout that is a 36-inch radius turnout. I believe the diverging route is like 28 or something. But so I bought this turnout at a train show, and it needed to be modified to be DCC friendly, and I will show that in a close-up in just a little bit. Something else I wanted to mention as well. So between the track here and the main line here, it's basically an inner loop of the layout, and I can kind of use it as a runaround. It's not prototypical, but not a huge deal to me. So the industrial area will come back up to the main line, and then along this straight stretch, and then come back down the track onto this side, and then back over to these switching areas. I don't know, just kind of like a fun thing on my layout to do. Hopefully once I get the layout in the middle here, operations going, it'll add some fun, interesting kind of, operations to do. All right, everybody, so here is my scratch-built turnout. This is the first scratch-built turnout I have ever made. It is a curved number 8, which first off was pretty tough to do as my first one. I would say all around it works pretty well, but yeah, number 8 turnout. This mainline outer track here is 50-inch, and then the inner diverging track is 35-inch. Now I went with this size turnout because this inner curved track, the main line through here, is 45.5 inches. This outside is 48, but the 50 and 35 were the closest I could find to 45.5 inch radius. So technically the radius isn't completely circular, but if you're just standing off layout and observing the trains go by, you don't really notice that it's a bit of an uneven radius on kind of this left side of my skewer, kind of off camera, and then on the other side as well. Yeah, so all these ties are just the fast tracks wood ties, and then obviously the rail is soldered to the fast tracks PC boards, and I have it on a Caboose Industry manual ground throw. The only problem, or probably two problems I have, is this point in particular. I got a little lazy and impatient when I was shaving the rail down to a point, so it doesn't fit too snug into here. So the only time it will catch a wheel or catch a flange is if a piece of rolling stock, or sometimes an engine, if the engine isn't heavy enough, it will catch this point and then derail. It doesn't do that if it's taking the main line or if it's coming the opposite way from the siding up to the main line. The only other issue is somewhere in this region, the track is a little tight, not really engaged. Sometimes the flange will come up and ride the top of the rail and come back down. I don't really get derailments, but I notice it happening, so maybe I'll fix it, maybe not. Maybe it's just something I live with this turnout, with it being my very first one ever made. Oh, and one more thing to mention, if I haven't mentioned it already. This is a Fast Tracks jig, and I used their printed templates. You can kind of see where the paper is discolored and pretty rough. That's where the PC boards were and where all the soldering was going on. And just as long as you keep the rails perfect with this template, you should be fine. It's a little easier said than done once you're in the nitty-gritty and working, but it wasn't too hard to do. Time consuming since it was my first turnout, but all in all, not too bad of an experience. Transitioning into these Caboose Industry ground throws attached to the turnouts in the industrial area. So here, with the track and turnouts nailed to the plywood, there wasn't really enough room to install these ground throws properly, and not to mention the actual throw for the turnout is on the opposite side. So what I did here was I took the Fast Tracks ties, glued them to the plywood in a fashion to where they kind of looked like an extension of the tie from the turnout. Then I took evergreen plastic, kind of cut out a rectangle and glued it to the bottom of the ground throw to attach it to the ties. And that center tie, I drilled a hole on the end there so the ground throw could be snugly fit in there and sit on the ties. And then you can't see it, but that center tie has a piece of evergreen plastic glued under it, which is attached to the actual throw of the turnout. Therefore, I can throw this turnout manually using this Caboose Industry ground throw. So on this turnout, I just previously mentioned I had to make it DCC friendly. So what I did was I got rid of the original throw bar and then soldered on this Fast Tracks PC tie board. And that was just to isolate the points. And then I will eventually cut off the end that's kind of protruding over the roadbed. And then for the ground throw to work with it, all I did was drill a hole into the PC tie board and then installed the ground throw, and it works just like a charm. So I've mentioned a couple times now that the turns on my layout are all super elevated, and I figured I would go ahead and kind of share with you guys my method on doing this because I feel like it's pretty unconventional. What I did was I cut duct tape in 2-foot strips and then cut those to be a 1/4 inch wide, and then I taped those on top of the cork roadbed. The first strip would start 4 inches from the beginning of the turn. Then the next layer I taped on would be 4 inches from the start of the previous layer. And then I just kind of had those staggered up to 4 layers high. And this gave the trains a nice gradual lean into the turn. And these shots showing the layering of the duct tape. So the last talking point I want to highlight and kind of briefly talk about is the classic piano wire to attach to a turnout. So this is on my only crossover on the double main line. And I took piano wire and attached it to the ground throw on the far turnout, ran it through some evergreen styrene tubing under the near track, and then attached it to a piece of evergreen styrene, which is attached to the Caboose Industry ground throw. And the setup I have for the ground throw is pretty similar to the one I had for the industrial area. I will eventually have this painted and weathered, and it should blend in nicely like a piece of railroad equipment. So that concludes the tour of the inner portion of my layout. I figured I would do the filming this way as well to give maybe more of an honest representation of the middle of my layout, considering it's just kind of bare bones, you know, bench work, track, and wiring, and that's it. So I wanted to kind of give an honest view of what I see whenever I walk downstairs into the layout, you know, duck under and then pop up in the middle here. So I figured I would just kind of show you guys an honest representation as well. Well everyone, that concludes my layout tour. I hope you enjoyed seeing a Class 1 double mainline inspired layout in a small space. To say briefly, I do mention frequently that my layout is in a small space. And I do that because I hope it's encouraging to anyone who wants something similar. While sacrifices in scene compression will certainly be made, you can have a pretty convincing double mainline run with some convincing scenes. Just kind of think of it as a bunch of shelf layouts strung together. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tour, and I will see you all in the next video.